When we think about human creativity, we usually think of art, or science, or amazing inventions. But there's a darker side to our ingenuity, a chilling creativity in how we punish each other. In this explainer, we're going to look at some of the most inventive and horrifying methods ever devised. I have to warn you, this is not for the faint of heart.
So let me ask you a pretty dark question. What is the absolute peak of creative cruelty that humans have ever come up with? It's a tough thing to think about, but it really forces you to look at the extremes of our own nature. What happens when justice, or revenge, or just sheer power pushes our ingenuity to its most terrifying limits? Well, we're about to find out.
Scaphism. Remember that word. We're going to come back to it later. For now, just let it sit there. Before we can even begin to unravel what it means, we need to understand the why. Why do we punish people in the first place?
See, punishment isn't always about causing physical pain or death. Sometimes it's about something far more social. It's about shame. It's about marking someone either to cast them out of the group or as a way for them to try and get back in.
This right here shows such a fascinating contrast. It's all about who's in control. On the left, you've got Yubitsume, a Yakuza member, to show they're truly sorry, cuts off their own finger. It's an act of honor, in a way. They are in control of their own atonement. But on the right, tarring and feathering is the complete opposite. A mob takes over, strips a person of all their dignity, and parades them around for public humiliation. It's about turning them into a grotesque joke.
And here's a perfect example of how that shame could be made permanent. Pitch capping wasn't always meant to kill you, though. I'm sure infections were a huge problem. No, its main purpose was to leave a permanent, hideous scar, a public mark that basically screamed traitor for the rest of your life. It didn't just rip away skin, it ripped away your entire identity.
Okay, look at this number. 14,850. It represents a punishment on a scale that is just unimaginable. After a battle back in 1014, the Byzantine Empire Basil II captured about 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers. He blinded 99 out of every 100 men, and that 100th man, he was left with a single eye, just so he could lead his 99 blind comrades back home. It was a walking, breathing, horrifying message of absolute power.
All right, now we're going to see a shift. We're moving away from shame and power and getting into the pure mechanical infliction of agony. This is where human ingenuity got laser-focused on one thing: how to cause the most suffering for the longest possible time, usually to get a confession.
The rack. I mean, it's infamous for a reason, right? It's so simple, so brutal, and so horribly effective. They say the sound alone, the sound of sinews stretching and joints popping, was often enough to make anyone confess to absolutely anything. The pain was the entire point. This device was engineered to slowly, systematically deconstruct a human body.
Now this device, it is just psychologically brilliant in its cruelty. The heretic's fork didn't really do anything to you, actively. Instead, it forced you to torture yourself. You couldn't sleep. You couldn't even lower your head to rest. The second your exhausted muscles gave out, you'd impale yourself on those spikes. It turned the simple, necessary act of falling asleep into an absolute terror.
The Spanish donkey is another one of those devices that weaponized a person's own body against them. So, the victim was forced to straddle a sharp, triangle-shaped wedge of wood, like they were riding a horse. Then, weights were tied to their feet, and from there, gravity and physics just did the rest. The wedge would slowly, agonizingly split the person in two.
So, let's just pause here for a second. It's a question really worth thinking about. When a society engineers such meticulous, detailed devices for inflicting pain, what does that really tell us about them? About their fears, their values, their whole idea of justice? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go into our next section.
And now we arrive at the final act. These aren't methods for getting information or for shaming someone. Oh no, these are punishments where death is the whole point. But a quick death? That's seen as way too merciful. This is where execution becomes a horrifying, twisted form of public theater.
The brazen bull is a legend of cruelty that comes to us from ancient Greece. Imagine a hollow metal bull, big enough to hold a person, with a fire lit underneath. It's a terrifying idea on its own, but the true, and I use this word very darkly, the true genius was in the details.
This is where you see the truly performative nature of this thing. It wasn't enough to just kill the person inside. Their agony had to be transformed into a spectacle. A whole system of tubes and stops was engineered inside the bull's head to convert the victim's screams into the bellowing of a real angry bull. They literally turned an execution into a monstrous concert for the crowd.
Reserved for only the most heinous crimes imaginable, Ling Chi, or death by 1,000 cuts, was just pure, distilled suffering. The goal was very clear: keep the victim alive and conscious for as long as humanly possible, while their body was slowly dismantled, piece by piece. There are even reports of a fishnet being tied tightly around the body, and the executioners slicing off the bits of flesh that bulged through the holes.
This was the signature punishment for high treason in England, and it was a brutal, step-by-step ritual of complete destruction. First, you were dragged through the streets. Then you were hanged until you were almost dead, but they'd cut you down. Then you'd be disemboweled while you were still alive. And finally, you were beheaded and your body was cut into 4 pieces to be displayed all across the country as a warning. It was the ultimate act of state-sanctioned annihilation.
Which brings us full circle to our final subject. We've seen punishment as shame, as mechanical pain, as public theater, but there is one method, spoken of since ancient times, that seems to combine all of these into a uniquely biological and psychological horror. It's time to talk about that word from the beginning. It's time to talk about scaphism.
Scaphism, also known as the boats. It sounds almost absurd when you first hear it. Milk and honey? How bad could that possibly be? Well, the whole point of this diet was to induce the most violent, uncontrollable diarrhea you can imagine. The victim was trapped between 2 rowboats, or inside one, with only their head, arms, and legs sticking out.
Then their exposed body was also smeared with that same mixture of milk and honey. This combination, the sweet coating on their skin and the accumulating filth from the forced diarrhea, it attracted every insect imaginable. They would swarm the victim, biting, stinging, laying eggs in their flesh. Vermin and parasites would begin to burrow into their living body, slowly eating them from the inside out. And every single day, the executioners would come back to force-feed them more milk and honey just to keep them alive and prolong the absolute nightmare.
What's so uniquely terrifying about this method is that it weaponized nature itself. The victim wasn't killed by a blade or fire or a rope. They were killed by a slow, septic, parasitic consumption. To survive for over 2 weeks in that state, 17 days, is a level of horror that is just, it's almost impossible to even comprehend.
From the rack to the brazen bull to the absolute terror of scaphism, these methods are a disturbing testament to a very dark side of human creativity, and they force us to ask a really difficult question: is this kind of cruelty just a relic of a barbaric past, or is it a capacity that still lies dormant somewhere inside all of us? That's something to think about.